computer. All right.
All right, everyone. How are you guys? It's us again. We're back and we are ready to kind of dive into some conversation about authenticity. And a reminder, I'm Oscar Rivas, coach that is focused on authentic living. And, Emily, if you want to do a little intro again.
Yeah, so hey, if you haven't seen our first video, we're on, I called it take two. We are going to be talking about this idea of the gray zone and staying in there. And so I call myself a neural manifestation coach. So I combine this idea of our subconscious limiting beliefs with manifestation. So a whole different way of, we could say, goal achievement from the identity level. So said in many different ways. So Oscar and I were talking about this idea of living in the gray zone, and I loved what Oscar said about it. So do you want to kind of take off and kind of explain to me what the dangers are about living in this gray zone that so many of us are living in?
So yeah, it's in one of our conversations this came up, and one of the things I noticed that started to become clear over time in working with people in the clinic was this idea of how people would kind of repeat this statement in some way or another, and they would say like, "I never thought it was that bad," right? And so it caused me to think like, wow, how are we living our lives, right? How are we living our lives that we don't think certain things are that bad, and then all of a sudden we find ourselves having some kind of a breakdown or ending up in the hospital. And so this gray zone isn't really a definition that's, well known. We're kind of just putting it out there as kind of an idea, but there is a gray zone that we live in, and we function within it, but it's not sustainable. And over time, it begins to build incrementally. And then all of a sudden, we find ourselves kind of in a hole, and we're wondering, like, what happened? But what I've noticed is here are some of these signs that I noticed in people, because I had also had for some time to be able to do an intake assessment with individuals. And so I'll speak to two observations that I made that I think speak to this gray zone and the dangers of it. And so here are some of the things in an emotional sense that people would state. They would say that their moods were becoming more fluctuating. And so that's one of the things that they would say. Another thing that people would say was that their actual moods became numb to them. And so they had so many challenges that they just became numb to the emotional experience. So they wouldn't really feel much. Um, and so emotionally, they were in this state of either knowing that, like, hey, my moods were just going up and down. They were just going out of control, becoming very intense. And then another, sign was that people reported was ongoing, right? They would say, like, I don't feel anything anymore. Nothing helps. Nothing makes me happy. I feel numb. Um, Behaviorally, there was some staple things as signs that I began to notice in people when they reported what they were going through in this assessment. One of them was very interesting because I never thought, even though I heard this before, but their sleeping patterns were terrible.
Mm,
Individuals would say like, "Hey, I grew up this way, but lately it's been like 2 or 3 years where I don't sleep at night very much." Something keeps them awake.
mm,
They all have different stories as to what that is, but their sleeping patterns typically were described as, I don't sleep at night anymore. So that was one behavioral thing. Another one was their eating habits. They just started to change in the sense of like whatever routine they had, whatever diet they had, whatever that looked like began to change. And it
mm,
changed from a form of routine to like a very sporadic type of experience where they just ate whatever, whenever, and it wasn't consistent. It wasn't nutritional. Um, and then the third observation that I noticed people reporting through this assessment process was their social interactions. They went from like, and this is funny because even parents that were bringing in their children
mm,
into the clinic for assessment for intake, they would report this about their children. They say, "Oh my gosh, their appetite was incredible. They would eat like, I mean, their relationships were incredible, they were just this kid that was always, happy and jumping around and everything. And now it's like they don't want to hang out with anyone. They're in their room all day long. They all they do is spend their time in the digital world. And so those were some of the things that I noticed people reported constantly
Hmm.
and different backgrounds, right? And so then I started to kind of wonder this gray zone
Hmm.
area where people were we're in, right?
Hmm.
And then someone will ask us, how are we doing? And t the typical response to all of those changes was, well, you know how it is, life is tough, I'm pushing through it.
Mm.
And that's where I want to kind of maybe dive into is this idea of pushing through life because
Yeah,
it's very dangerous.
I think kind of what caught my attention with you is even right before we get to that idea of even pushing through life is this idea of it's fine. It's fine. Like everything's fine. I should be grateful for what I have, or people have it worse than I do. I think that can even be some of the first telltale signs that we're not allowing ourselves to actually live the life that we want to live and that we're settling for what we are, what we have. And it's interesting that you say that because two of the things that came to my mind, kind of even in my journey or watching others, is this idea of hitting rock bottom. So, one of the big things that you said was going numb. And so, my coping mechanism throughout my whole life was I went numb to my emotions and feelings. I was so disassociated that it took me hitting an extreme rock bottom to be forcefully taken out physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So I had to give up everything that I believed who I was, my identity. I had to completely start all over again. And
Mm,
it was that rock bottom that forced me to actually transition. And that's kind of what people say. I think also too, what really caught my attention was this idea of moods and things like that. So when you said that all of a sudden we're getting these sporadic emotions and moods, what's fascinating is it came to this idea of like feeding the sleeping dog. Because the more and more that we stuff down our emotions and things like that, all of a sudden they start to like surface in like little
hmm
spurts, little outbursts, things like this. I've had clients before, she's like, I don't get it. All of a sudden I'll just like have these massive angry spells. Something will trigger something and they'll come back up because we keep feeding the sleeping dog. And then when it's hungry, it
hmm
comes back out. And we forget that when we stuff these things down, they actually make they it's kind of like stuffing paper into like a trash bin. Well, it's going to keep filling up, and you keep trying to like stuff it, or the beach ball analogy, stuff it underwater, but it will pop up eventually. And so it's those are some of the biggest dangers of the gray zone. Is like we can live in it, we can survive in it, but it's not going well.
and that's I think the thing that through science where when you dive into emotional experience and um how emotions function within our system when you think about our behaviors and relationships and then how that affects us, the idea of where we're at in this gray zone and kind of just maybe comparing it, not intentionally, but saying like, that person's life is way harder than mine. I'm struggling, right? But but I'm okay. I think being in that space really um becomes a comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I've noticed it's not only personally going through my own challenges and struggles, um, but also noticing it in others in the work that I do is it becomes a comfort zone. And the thing about comfort zone is that our body over time tells us it's not working, right? You're comfortable with it because you're familiar with it, but the danger comes in when our body starts to tell us like, hey, this isn't working, it's not sustainable. And then we ignore it, right? I'm strong, I'm a strong woman,
Yeah.
I'm a super
Yeah.
dad, right? Um, and so this gray area, a lot of times over time when you see the different world, when you see people who are down at their lowest points in life, and then you see the people that are just pushing through, and then you see the people that appear to be thriving. This gray area, as much as it seems like it's safe, I'm realizing through study and observation that it's actually really dangerous
Mm-hmm.
because our body cannot sustain that over time. And I don't want to give that message like, hey, you guys are all going to end up in the hospital
No,
because you're
no,
not paying
no, no.
attention.
Like there's different types of, so we can look at this in a couple of different lenses. Is that first I want to highlight like what our subconscious is actually doing is that our subconscious's role is to keep us safe. And safety to the subconscious means predictability because predictability means control. So we find we see individuals say a common one is in abusive relationships. We say, why do they stay? Because there's an element of predictability within there. So predictability, even though the outcome is not comfortable nor is it safe, it still has a sense of control because I know how to respond to the situation. And so I think that's a little bit where the gray zone comes because it's going into that unknown or what will happen. And so we talked about this too, was that idea of continuing. So, well, what if I leave this person? Okay. And so then, and what? Continue. Because we stay right stuck in, well, what if I leave this situation? Your brain's like, I don't know. I don't know. Okay, well, we need to tell it what could happen. We need to create solutions. We need to come up with that next level. Um, in order for us to continuously move beyond that. Because when we look at the subconscious, it's just telling, it's trying to just keep us safe. Even though safe does not necessarily mean comfortable, nor does it necessarily mean physically safe. It just means predictable. And predictable just means control. I mean, yeah, it's control. So yeah, situation.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. I don't know what your experience is with this idea of control, but like what's your understanding? Because I noticed it's in everything that we do, and it creates inner turmoil, like this idea of like having
Yeah.
control. And to be clear, I'm not talking about the kind of control that people want to have over others, right? I want to control my child. I want to, that is definitely challenging for sure and unhealthy, but just the practice of control. So what's your experience with that?
I think that's actually interesting what you said, the practice of control. Because when we look at control, we're trying to maintain a sense of predictability and stability within our lives. So we see a lot of people doing that, as you said, trying to control other people or trying to control the situations or the outcomes. Rather than what I liked about your way of saying that with control is that really the purpose of control is saying that the situation isn't necessarily what matters, but the response to the situation that we have. The control that we
Mm,
always have is not on others, not on the situation, but the way in which we choose to respond or not respond to a situation. We're taught, though, to control others. We're taught to try to control our circumstances and things like that. And that's kind of where that inner turmoil comes in because you can't control other people, you can't control your situations. It's the whole idea of like fighting reality. Reality's already happened, it's already happening right now. So you can't fight what already
mm.
is because it already is. But
Right.
you can choose your next step or your next action. You can choose that next but yeah, that inner turmoil comes in when you're trying to control everything other than yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Um, it's such an interesting way of being in the sense of you're right. I think what you mentioned is something that maybe we don't reflect on too much, but our subconscious, which is our nervous system, right? It's all one system. It's just our awareness of how it's functioning, right? The conscious is we're aware because, we're guiding our thoughts or we're noticing we have intrusive thoughts, right? But our subconscious part of our nervous system as well is still operating, but it's not operating in a direction. It's operating for us to, like you said, to create some sense of safety from the experiences that we've had in life. And then we perceive situations as dangerous. They may be, they may not be, but our nervous system, right, has solidified that like, ooh, this is dangerous for you. So I'm gonna tell you it's dangerous and you're gonna behave a certain way. And so this idea of controlling um situations is so challenging because situations are at conscious level. right?
Mm,
I'm homeless right now, or I'm being abused in my relationship. That's a
mm,
very conscious level
mm,
awareness. Our subconscious, based on all the experiences we've had and all the experiences that our body has recorded in that nervous system, is
mm,
really telling us like, this isn't good for you. And then our conscious is like, oh, I know this, but I could figure it out. I can make it work, or I can push through it, or I can do this, or I can do that. And then we try to control externally a situation
mm,
when our nervous system is telling us, no, just control your response to it. Just like if you're in this situation, these are the actions you can take.
mm,
Um, and it's challenging. This is where I think a lot of work is being done today. And there's a lot of evidence showing like, okay, we can have tools, right? But here's I think the challenge that I noticed too, is that our nervous system records everything, but it can also be maladapted,
mm,
right? It can say like, hey, this space is safe, but it isn't. It's an abusive relationship.
mm.
But our nervous system is like, oh, you've been in this so long. This is familiar to you.
Yeah, I
And then
think
the
what's
chemicals come in,
key.
right?
Yeah, I think what's key though is to remember that we can say looking out that it's a maladaptive response. However, what we have to realize too is that everything that our subconscious adopts, its whole goal and function is to keep us safe. And so at one point that actually did serve us. So if we look at, say, a child who's in a very unsafe home environment, well, the coping mechanisms that they develop or the coping mechanisms that we develop in our life, whether it's to an extreme emotional situation or something, at that time and point, they actually do serve us to keep us, to allow us, I'm going to say, to survive in that
Mm,
moment in time. It becomes maladaptive when we no longer need it and we continue operating from it. Because it's interesting when we look at the subconscious, what it's really trying to do is confirm our beliefs that we already have, our beliefs that are based off our past experiences, because it only has the past to predict the future. And then the other thing that it does is really interesting is answer the questions that we ask ourselves.
hmm
So getting kind of out of this gray zone and out of these situations, we kind of look at two things. We have to look at, well, what are we believing now? And instead of trying to do like positive affirmations or positive self thinking and stuff, because that's at a conscious level, but you say that at a conscious level, our subconscious is going to be like, yeah, right. Yeah, right. Let me show you why this is not right. Because I have a different belief down here that I know is true. And so what I love to do is actually utilize this thing of questions, and I call them subconscious filter questions because our subconscious loves answering questions. Like it really does. That's probably why, actually, now that I think about it, why like a 2-year-old's favorite word is like why? Like
hmm
tell me why. It drives you insane, but they're like, why? Why? I want to know why. And so what I love about these questions is they always start as why am I? Here's the issue is what we naturally do. Well, we go, okay, well, why am I so fat? Why am I so poor? Why am I in such a abusive relationship? Here's the problem. Your brain's like, let me tell you why. So you reconfirm that same exact belief that you have right now that you're trying to escape or you're trying to change. How you want to utilize these questions is saying, okay, why am I in such a healthy relationship? Why am I treating my body with such respect? Why do I love going to the gym? Why do I love moving my body? Even though we're not quote unquote this person externally yet, when we start asking those questions as a person we want to be, our brain's like, huh, let me tell you why. And so it's actually your
mm,
subconscious will start going through and saying, why am I that person? We'll start looking for evidence, grabbing like pieces of content, it will having you this. And so all of a sudden, internally, you start becoming that person because all of our external actions, all of our external being is a result of who we are internally. So we can actually utilize these questions to start actually changing our subconscious without telling our subconscious lies. We're saying, well, why am I this? And your subconscious is like, well, let me tell you why we could be this. And so that actually gets over this idea of what you said earlier is looking at the fear of moving into the unknown because we
hmm
fear the unknown because there's no predictability. We don't know what's going to happen. So when we ask these questions, like, well, why am I this? Your brain's like, well, here's why you're this. And it kind of gives you that forward focused direction that you were just talking about. Because you said the
hmm
subconscious, it prevents us from really going to the forward. And so that's
Yeah,
kind of,
because it's designed, it's already like you've already laid out the function of it. And I think it's cool that you bring this up because you've mentioned it a few times in the other conversations that we had, right? Asking ourselves, you know, why something looks great. You know, why am I doing great at my job?
Mhm.
Regardless if I'm doing great or not.
Yeah.
I actually I read a journal entry one time that actually supports and reinforces what you're saying about our nervous system is trying to find, you know, the answer, and then it causes us to move forward in that direction.
Mhm.
And it was, I think the journal was something about that when we are in our interactions with others
Mhm.
and someone asks us something that we don't know the answer to, will most of the time make something up or lie. And it's
It's
because we have
yep,
this need, right, to have the
to
answer. We have this need, like
yeah.
we don't do well with not knowing.
Hmm.
And so we fill in the space with something.
Hmm.
Some people will say, many do. I mean, they'll say like, "Oh, I don't know," but most in studies show that like you'll make something up.
Hmm. You know what's funny? You see this a lot with quote unquote experts
Hmm.
because if they're the expert, shouldn't they know?
Exactly.
Yes. No, it's funny. And I think what you're saying is we actually in our subconscious, we have this thing called the reticular activating system. So that's our, some people call it just the RAS, and that's our filtering system. So
Hmm.
it's that idea of like when you focus on something, that thing's gonna be looking for it. So that's the whole idea of the car. Like looking for the yellow car. Oh, yellow car. Okay. Okay. And it like hyper focuses on that, you know?
Yeah. So then what are your thoughts on this idea of, now we're describing what we go through, right, in this gray area where our body's functioning a certain way. We kind of mentioned it's not sustainable because the body will tell us at some point, like, hey, there's something wrong, right? It sends us signals emotionally and then our thoughts and things like that. So in kind of your experience, or what are your thoughts on what does pushing forward mean? Because I've
Mm.
seen a lot of this. It's so funny. It's crazy how people say they're pushing through something.
Ooh.
And then what is that?
Yeah, I think what you're highlighting is this idea of not going forward, but forcefully pushing yourself forward. Was it you or was it a quote that I read? I think it's a quote I read again. It was true change is not changing the mask you're wearing. Because so
That's a
many
post I
times
made.
that was the post that you made. That was right. Because I was like, I'm
Yeah.
like, I read the post, but I'm like, it came from you. I was like, okay. And so I think so many of us are just changing the mask that we're wearing. Like you said, that's not pushing through. Rather than like when I work with people, okay, well, we're getting to your subconscious beliefs and things like that. But the thing I always start people with is like, you don't even know who you are. We
Right.
can't get to the subconscious beliefs till we try to start figuring out who you are. So so many times people will be like, oh, follow your purpose or do like start realigning yourself being authentic. Well, what does it mean to be authentic? Because we don't even know who we are. We're so disconnected. So it's really getting clear on your values. I think is one of the probably the best places to start because when you look at your values, it really tells you what is meaningful to you in your life, but also the type of character you want to be. And so when I do manifestation or goal setting or something like that, a lot of times we actually don't look at the action necessarily. We start looking at the feelings. So, how do we understand how do we want to feel in this life? What are those things that we respect in this life? How do we realign ourselves to making decisions based off of our values? So, say for instance, like some of my values, one of my biggest ones is quality. So quality, not just in material aspects, but quality in the content I produce, quality in the people that I have in my lives, quality in the content that I listen to, I read, I watch. Quality. What does quality mean? And so when we define them, like what does that word mean to ourselves or strength? Like it's physical, mental,
Mm,
emotional for me. And when we start defining our values and what they mean to us, all of a sudden, all of our decisions, we start saying, well, is this aligned with my values? Is this in line with my values? How do I want to feel in my life? How do I want to feel around these people? And so that's what I found for myself the best way to start stepping back into our authenticity and start reconnecting back to ourselves. because until we know ourselves, we really don't know what direction to go with to go. So we stay kind of in this gray zone because it's kind of like, well, if we remove what we're doing right now, we're left with a big hole. Okay, what do we fill that hole with? We don't
Mm.
know. So automatically we just resort back to what we already know to do. It's the same patterns and behaviors that we've been doing for years.
Yeah, we revert for sure. And then it
Mhm.
continues until we have more, and then we're it's like,
Yeah,
what
we need
happened?
to we need to have a direction that we want to start going instead so that we can start filling those holes with something different. So I
Yeah,
think,
I've heard people say, oh, I didn't think, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't think it was that bad, and then I was just pushing
mhm,
through. And then so my question over, when I was hearing that a lot, I started to ask a follow-up question. I would say, what does pushing through look like to you?
mm,
And it was interesting, the responses, because um there was no change in the way they functioned or
mhm,
operated.
yeah,
Um, but it was mostly like forcing something.
mhm,
And then maybe in the thinking process, that was what they've seen others do.
yeah.
And then they survived, so I should probably survive, right? So,
Mhm.
and I think forcing it looks like resistance and endurance. I saw that a lot, like, oh, I can endure this. And I'm not saying that people should not endure things.
Oh
I
yeah.
think there's a lot of value in enduring things. But what I am saying is that there's unnecessary endurance as well.
Mm,
And there are things that people were enduring when it was not necessary. And
yeah.
so it was very interesting. This gray zone pushing through looked like resistance to change and then enduring unnecessary things.
You know what's interesting when we look at our culture and something that you see for a lot of people that go to the gym, it's no pain, no gain. And it's interesting because I was actually talking with a trainer now does a lot of other things, but he's like, wait a second, no pain, no gain. That makes no sense. If you're always in pain, your body can never recover. So you literally will not gain anything. And so in
Mm,
interestingly enough, we always believe in like this situation, it's the same thing with force is okay, if I'm not in pain, then clearly I'm not going to gain. But here's the quote, no pain, no gain. And so it's really, if you're always in pain, there will be no gain, or at least the gain of what you want, because you can
mm,
gain an injured body, an injured soul, an injured relationship, an injured life. But what if you stop being in pain? Now, like you said, we always endure things inside of our life. There's always situations we cannot control. And those are things that we can grow and develop from because it's a way in which we choose to respond to them. But why do we pride ourselves in always being in pain? You know,
mm.
it's kind of like that hero story, but I think it's actually very misunderstood. Like the
Oh, the
hero,
hero story is for sure. Yeah,
yeah,
it's misunderstood. Yeah.
yeah.
There's always a sidekick to the hero, which means they don't do it alone. They have a
That is
support.
good. Oh, I'm ready to
Yeah.
go.
There's always support, which speaks to the idea of relationship. It's important to be in community. We don't thrive isolated, not only from physical isolation from others, but internal isolation, right? If I don't show courage inward and say, like, I can be vulnerable in some situations with my life with people that I love, you're isolating, right? If
Yeah.
I can't share my authenticity, you're isolating. And authenticity is one of the things that we hide the most, which is very interesting. Shame and authenticity. So my need to attach is a lot more strong throughout my days than my need to be authentic. But over time, my need to be authentic is what matters almost most. And so, yeah, I think that the aspect of relationship and community and having others in your life, not to do things for you,
Mhm.
but to interact with, to maybe work together, to, whatever that is. There's studies show that, over and over again, these aren't things that we're not making stuff up. I'm going to remind everyone, I'm not a doctor, but I've seen this process many times. I've dove into, I've spoken to, the licensed people, therapists. So I'm not diagnosing any of you out there. What I am sharing is a perspective to open up some maybe thoughts in your mind to consider as you to see how you're living your life. And one of the things pushing through usually looks like you said, right? This misunderstanding of the hero. I can do this, and there's value to that. However, when I can do this becomes your state,
Mhm.
there's something wrong.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say to this idea of pushing through. You can't be in that state. You can experience it and grow from it. But if you're in a state of that, if you're in a state of anything long term, that your body is um, not meant to participate in long periods of time, it's not going to go well. And
Yeah, it's that
so,
idea of like when we look at the health realm. So acutely, your immune system is turned on to fight, say, like the cold or something like that. If it's on chronically, it turns into autoimmune, the attack of oneself. Um, but what I really want to highlight too with community is that we also must ask, what community am I putting myself in? Is it a
mhm,
community where I can actually be authentically myself? Because this goes back to what you're talking about earlier, that attachment. So if we're attached to somebody, then we're trying to find our worth based off of what we believe they will or won't value within us. And that's not the purpose of community, because community, like a sidekick, is supporting who you already are. It's
mhm,
helping you continuously step in and be the best version of yourself. So with your community, look around and say, am I trying to fit inside of the mold of my community, trying to be part of my community in that way? Or is my community actually supporting who I am, allowing me to grow, become more authentically myself, building my strengths and my capacity? Of course, there's going to be hard truths of that, but in what way am I even relating to my community?
mhm. And
Yeah.
everything's a double-edged sword. It's like funny because I hear you
Yeah.
speaking and I hear like this stuff. It's like because people have questioned me when I present some idea that they could consider and explore, right? And so they'll say like, but you're telling me that um in a community, for example, this is just an example. You're telling me that like um I need to be part of a community, but then you're telling me to be myself.
Mhm.
And it's hard to be yourself when you're in a community because your community is going to give you feedback, right? They're going to tell you, like, we don't like this, we like this. And all of a sudden, if I feel like I don't belong, then because I am myself, I am authentic, then my community doesn't accept me. So I got to go find a community that, accepts me. And so it's a double-edged sword because when I used to do this, it was very confusing and I didn't know where to swing. And then
Yeah.
that's where I began to learn over time. Everything is like that.
Yeah.
Everything is like that.
Mhm.
Yes, I belong here, but no, I'm not always going to be accepted. Yes, I belong here, but no, I'm not always going to be accepted. And these concepts, right? They're all going to sound contradicting. And I think that's where people get lost, right? Because you'll say something and then you'll say another thing, and they're like, wait a minute, you said, well, it's both. And
The
I don't know if I've
yes
mentioned
and
this before.
principle. Yeah, it's the yes and. It's, can you hold two truths at the same time? Mm.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's tough because now I'll get asked, so are you telling me this? Yes. And are you telling me this? Yes. And they're contradicting, right? So
Both
which
of
one's right? It
both of
depends on what you want and how you
Mhm.
function, right? There's a lot of things, and the
Yeah.
reality is we're going to be in between those things throughout life because life is organic is one of the things that I say all the time. Life is organic. You're
Mhm.
not something that's non-living. You're
Mhm.
not something that's just sitting there and then you just stay there.
Yeah.
You're an organism that fluctuates within a
Mhm.
system and interactions.
Yeah, I think what's key, what you said, is you don't just stay there and it fluctuates, because part of this gray zone is a big part of it is not making a decision. It really we can choose the reality that we want to experience or the person that we want to become. The issue where we get stuck is, like you said, living in this gray zone, not making decisions, not being committed to a single decision, trying to hold two things at once that are going in completely opposite directions. That's part of the gray zone too, is where you're trying to be this person and this person all at the same time. They conflict. And so it leaves you in this messy middle. So you
Hmm.
can't move forward because it's a tug of war. And so, like you said, there's so many different truths out there. You actually get to have the choice to choose your own truth. The key, though, is to make a decision and to realize when you make that decision, the next moment you can make another decision. Life is dynamic. You're always growing. We're always changing.
Yeah, no, I think going back to the what you're saying in the gray zone area too is this idea of taking action. There's a spiritual leader that I look to, and he made this statement, and I've explored it a lot,
Mhm.
and I've seen what it does in life. But he said that as human beings, we're not designed to be acted upon, we're designed to act.
Ugh.
And you can, either way too. He actually, I think, said we're designed to act and not be acted upon.
Mhm.
So kind
That's
of
so good.
meaning that, right? The acting requires me to make a decision, like you
Mhm.
said, make a decision and then move
Mhm.
forward with it. And
Mhm.
then make another decision and move forward with
Mhm.
it. And then
Mhm.
as you walk, things will become clear. But when we're acted upon, we become miserable. We're trapped,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? So something that could act upon me is, let's say I'm going to school, the school
Mhm.
system's acting upon me.
Mhm.
If I don't do my homework, if I don't participate, if I don't engage, if I don't
Yeah.
learn, then that's me taking action, right?
Mhm.
Then what will happen? Then the school system is going to act upon me,
Mhm.
right? They're going to tell me, now you have to get more tutoring. Now you have to take an extra test. Now you have to do this. Now you have to do that. And then now it's going to be things that are set upon me that I'm
Mhm.
going to say like, you're making my life miserable. I don't want to do any of this. And so
You know
the
what's
idea of taking
interesting?
action, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, I was gonna say, know what's interesting about that as you're saying that we we live our lives trying to always please other people, but yet know what's interesting about that is that it actually creates the most um like a lack of control, a lack of predictability within our lives if we're always waiting on how others will respond or their choice. It's like the only control we have is the choices that we make and not caring what other people think to a degree. Yet we're always asking ourselves, how do I be the person that others will accept? And then there's so much lack of clarity or a lack of what am I trying to say here? Is that lack of predictability, things like that, because you're always waiting for somebody else, but you never know how they're going to respond to something. So that
Mm,
kind of leaves us more in a fog rather than making decisions for ourselves and taking control of our own life. It's always waiting on somebody else, how their responses to our actions that leaves us more control, leaves us less in control of our lives, less predictability, things like that.
I think maybe empowerment is what comes to mind as I hear you kind of sharing that. It's like there's when we're waiting for others, they hold the power, right? When we're waiting for their response or reaction, we have given power to them. And then when we take action and we're no longer waiting for them, then we empower ourselves because now we're leading whatever it is that needs to be led.
It's actually what I realized was I don't know why I keep losing the word for it. Um so this I'm trying to think of the word for it. It's not empowerment at all. It's actually when we look at our subconscious, it's always trying to predict. It's the fear of the unknown.
Mm,
So when we have individuals and we're always trying to meet their requirements or trying to live our life in their vision, it leaves us in this state of not having what was the word I just used? I don't know why I keep losing it.
if I hear you correctly, we're left with uncertainty
Yes,
because of
uncertainty.
we don't know what they think of us or what they're perceiving or
Yeah.
wanting and us as a person.
Yeah, we're stuck in the unknown. And
We're
to
stuck
the
in the unknown.
subconscious, the unknown is a place of fear. And so if we're always being guided by other people, we're always left leaving ourselves in this place of unknown and fear, which is interesting because it's the exact thing we're trying to escape.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I love that idea. I love it.
Yeah,
There's a
I'm
quote.
sorry it took me so long to get there. I'm like, why am I losing on my words?
No, but
But
it kind
yeah,
of speaks and links to this idea of
yeah.
authenticity at the same time, the
Mhm,
gray zone, this gray area
mhm,
where um I heard a quote that Jay Shetty shared years ago, and it's not his, he just shared it.
yeah.
And I think the last name of the person who's actually the original person that's being quoted is Cooley. Um, and I love the quote because when I first heard it, I understood nothing about it. And so
Yeah.
it caused me to be
Yeah.
curious and like dive in, like, what are you saying, right? But it goes something like this. I might chop it up, but he says, today I am not who you think I am. I am not who I think I am. I am who I think you think I am.
Yeah. It's sad, isn't it?
Yes. And it goes back to this idea of I want to please my parents because I love them and they love me.
Mhm,
They want me to go through this pathway, whatever
mhm,
that is, right? Career wise and whatever. They want me to go through this pathway. I enjoy this other thing,
mhm,
but because I love them and I know they're going to be supportive, um, I think that they want me to become this.
mhm.
And then the person lives life going in that direction. And then their authentic self is saying, like, this sucks, dude. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? Right. And then one day it comes to a head
Mhm,
in some very interesting way. The way I've seen it is there's a conflict, whether it's within the person or with those they love. And in that conflict, this comes out. Well, I thought you wanted me to be this. I thought this was what you wanted. And then the other person, and that other person can be you, that other
mhm.
person says, that's not what I wanted. I just wanted you to be happy.
Mm.
And it's like, oh my gosh, this whole time, right? I was being this thing, this person, because
Yeah.
that's what I thought, right? And so most of us are walking around. I know I did for like so many years of my life and
Yeah.
until I started having these things happen in my life where I thought my family, who are the kindest people in the world,
Mm.
wanted me to be a certain
Yeah.
something. And I
Yeah.
was living that way. And then in my teen years, I began to feel not aligned with that. And I was frustrated. I was such a frustrated little kid in my teen years.
Oh my gosh, I love that. But no, what's fascinating as you say that is um it's living in the gray area of communication because we make up
Hmm.
these stories by not even asking like this simple question, not communicating with people, and that also keeps us stuck right in the gray zone because we just start creating stories in our mind. Isn't
Yeah,
that crazy?
100%. That's another thing I saw in the assessments. It's like people made up these stories and it's like, where'd you get that from?
Oh,
And they're like, well, it's just because, when I'm in my room all day long, that's all I can do is think about stuff. And it's like, oh, so you made up the story.
isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I do want to see if there's insight on kind of like what to do when you're in this gray zone because I literally had a conversation with a friend yesterday. We talked for a good like 3 hours actually. It was very interesting.
Huh.
Um, but he was describing this gray zone. He was saying like, I lived through a lot.
Mhm.
Here's some of the things that came up. I've lived through some things. Life was challenging. Currently, because he has a great family.
Yeah.
His wife is going through some things, medically speaking, and then his kids are grown up. They have their own kids, so they're grandparents. And he kept on repeating this idea of like, gosh, I don't feel like I'm part of a community. Was one thing that he repeated over and over again. The other thing is like, I don't feel energized. There's only like a few people that I interact with that I feel like this. I just feel energized. When I'm done with them, I'm good for like 3 weeks. Like I want to do things in life. I want to explore life and experience life. So that's the second thing that he mentioned over and over again. The other thing he mentioned over and over again, he's like, I'm gonna be 60 this year. I'm gonna be 60 this year. And so out of all the things he was mentioning, those were the three main themes. So of course, jumping into a friendship and coaching type mixture of a role, I started asking him questions like, well, what are you doing? And you and I had talked about this, I think. And he was like, well, I'm doing this, and then so what's changed? And he's like, well, I used to this, but now I'm doing this. And I, okay, so what's changed? If you've done it before, what's changed? And nothing was changing. He's doing the same thing. So a lot of the things that people go through in this state of like, I'm not feeling fulfilled or I'm not feeling excited about life right now. Like I feel like I'm in a slump, right? Those kind of phrases um really is someone saying, I'm trying to change everything around me, but I don't know what I need to change inside of me.
Mhm.
And that was very interesting to hear from him. It's like, I'm doing this and I'm doing that and I'm connecting with people. And the other day, I'm not a person that goes and hangs out with a friend for like all day long. He's like, I don't, that's not my lifestyle. He's like, but I did it. And I went with this one guy who's a friend and they hung out all day. He's like, it was good. He's like, but I just, I can't do that all the time. Right. And so, and so I'm thinking like, so then I started asking him like, so what are you changing inside? He's like, what do you mean? Just what's inside of you? Like, what's inside of you? What are you changing? And it was very interesting, the conversation. And it led to this idea that we were both sharing, which I kind of had somebody else um, that I was interacting with about a year ago. And this is where this idea originated in that conversation with that person. And so the idea was like to feel what you want to feel, what you're saying you want to feel. There's all kinds of things. And he mentioned some of them, right? I want to eat better because he's going to turn 60.
Mm,
Just funny. He's like, I want to eat better. Um, he's like, and then I want to have quality relationships and be in community. And
mhm,
then I said, that's awesome. That's like part of this whole dynamic.
mhm,
But internally, what's
mhm,
the process that gets you from being where you're at in the gray zone to like stepping out? And here's the thing that we were talking about was we are designed to be stuck in areas of our life for our
mhm,
own protection, similar to the nervous system, right? We're designed to get stuck so that we're protected, and then we become, comfortable, and then we can learn and grow, and then go beyond that. But the idea is that we're constantly landing in these places where we stop, right? Like, oh,
mhm,
I'm a little more social, and I'm good there, and I stop with the same three people. That's all I'm doing, right?
mhm,
Or, oh my gosh, I'm an artist, and so all I'm painting is this because it really fascinates me. So that's all I'm doing, right? And all of a sudden we get into these routines. Unknowingly, we get stuck. And so the idea of being in the gray zone is what action, right? What choice do I need to make? And then what action do I take to become unstuck? And what's getting us stuck is translated to what is my limiting belief? What is
mhm.
my limiting thinking pattern?
I
And
think I
then,
want to add on to that too, is it's not sometimes always just a limiting thinking pattern. I think sometimes we have to remember that as humans, as you've brought up many times, is that we're in this dynamic cycle. So a lot of
mm,
times we follow an interest or a passion and we dive into it. And then it's almost like the cycle of going into something, growing it, mastering it. And then as humans, one of our biggest needs is this idea of growth, development, and evolution.
mm,
But yet that's where that fear within the subconscious of moving past what we have now reestablished as a new safety because it's predictable, because
mhm,
everybody around us relates to us in a certain way and the certain identity that we currently have. Because when we change ourselves, all of a sudden we have to change all the people around us. Because, like what you said with your friend, is like some people just drain him. Well, yeah, because if you're becoming a different person, those people now drain you rather than the
mhm,
people that energize you. So, as we're going through these shifts, I think regardless of where we are in our life in that dynamic, what we need to continuously ask ourselves is how does this feel? How does this feel? How do I want to feel? And it's asking, does this align with my values? Because when your friend says, well, now I want to eat healthier, what's really underneath of that? Because it's not just eating healthier, because what we think we want, the thing, and what we actually want aren't necessarily the same things. Because what I might be hearing him saying is, okay, he's telling me he's age 60, he's telling me he wants to eat better. So what I'm hearing potentially is that I want thriving health into my
mhm.
later years. And he thinks that eating healthier is the mechanism that will get him there. But if we start following instead of just eating healthier, because eating healthier can be very objective and subjective depending on the individual, like what that looks like, what that means, and what each individual needs. And so when we start saying, okay, well, why am I thriving in my health right now? Your subconscious is going to start looking for that. And as you start looking for those answers, saying, what makes me feel like I am thriving? So say I'm moving
Hmm.
my body a certain way, this feels like I'm thriving, this doesn't. Say I'm eating some food, well, this energizes me and this doesn't. So all of a sudden, we're going based off of feeling rather than the shoulds of society. Because you go and you look up what's healthy and what's not for everything. I mean, it's a, oh my goodness, you can find anything and everything. That can be a rabbit hole that you go down, and you're like, there are so many different directions to go. I don't know where to go. You try one, you're like, this is not working for me, but it should be. And then you create the whole entire disaster rather than reconnecting back to that feeling within yourself. So life should be really directed by a feeling is how is this making me feel? Am I staying authentic and aligned with my values, who I am, who I want to become, that next version of myself, because it's also an evolution at the same point. And so I know we're coming up on time and everything like that.
Hmm.
So I kind of want you to wrap up this idea of the gray zones, reminding us of the dangers and kind of that big message that you want us to come away with as we start ending this conversation.
Yeah, I think the danger in this gray area is a couple of things, and I've mentioned both of them, I think, in some way or another. But one of them is that we are resisting a process of change
Mm,
and the way we function, and we are enduring unnecessarily at times.
mm,
So that's the one thing that I want to be able to
mm,
make sure and highlight in this place of being in the gray zone. And then the other one is the quality of life, living and thriving,
mm,
living life. Um, there's a whole experience that's different. And people don't see it as a difference. They
mm,
see it as like I'm living life and it's great. And then when you see their patterns and you see their, and
mm,
I'm not measuring their life. What I am saying is that we're not designed to live one specific way
mm.
and then say like I'm set. We're
Ooh,
not.
that's good.
And people
Yeah.
do that all the time. They,
Mm,
they'll say like I don't have mental health issues. I have a great job. My family's healthy and this and that. Okay. So how are you living
mm,
life, right? It's so interesting how many people, when they're okay, they don't look beyond because they think, what for?
mm,
And and I'll share this because I think it's going to come out at some point, but it's necessary to share. The reason I value this idea of living life
mm,
and thriving and just enjoying it and with all its imperfections and everything is because I lived that great life. I had a great upbringing. I met this wonderful woman in high school and young woman in high school, and we eventually found love, got married. Our relationship was incredible. And I attribute that, now knowing what I know, is that she constantly engaged me in the growth process. I don't know
mm,
if it was intentional, but I do know that we were growing like this. It was always an ongoing thing of growth. And it was such a wonderful relationship. We had three wonderful kids. And in 2014, she was diagnosed with cancer. In 2016, she passed away.
mm,
And there was a lot of learning in that whole process. And
mm,
then the grieving process is a whole nother right aspect
mm,
of the human experience. Um, and it's experience of loss, and loss can come in different ways. But what I learned is that if I were to look at my life when it was great,
mm,
and I look at my life right now, I can honestly say I have gone through a lot and it's been
mm,
challenging, but I'm not meant to live in this state of
mm,
sorrow, right? I can grieve, yes. You can have
mm,
emotions of sadness and things like that, emotions of regret. I can definitely have that. but I'm not designed to stay in that space
Mm-hmm.
as a human being. As
Mm-hmm.
much as I was given from her, I now know, hey, world, whatever you're going through and you feel like you're okay or you're in the lowest lows of lows, there's
Mm-hmm.
more. And you can thrive. And I know the difference now. I know the difference between like, oh my gosh, I'm living a great life, or no, I'm thriving and I'm in a constant state of learning and trying and experimenting and facing my fears. And now, because of you asking myself, I am such a great marketer for my business, right? And let
Ah,
my
I love
system
that.
figure that out, right?
Yes.
So those are the 2 points I want to make sure that I highlight in this
That's so
idea of being in
important.
a gray zone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, unnecessary endurance is not, it's not helpful. It doesn't serve people.
Yeah.
Uh, and then this idea um, of living and thriving. There's a difference between being alive and living. And there's quotes about this, that people say
Mm-hmm.
it in different ways, right? They're saying, oh, this person is alive at 50, but they died 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that statement really you see it in different versions, but that statement is what I personally feel authenticity can bring into this experience of life.
Yeah, I mean, you can't follow up with that. I think the two questions that I want to leave people with is where am I not being authentic in my life or within myself, honestly? And then where am I not growing? Where am I not
Mm,
evolving? Yeah, I think those are kind of like some of the two main things to take away from this. So, Oscar, I just want to thank you for another conversation. I know we'll be on next week. You got to figure out a topic for the next one. So that'll be a surprise for next week. But
yeah,
we'll have everything in the show notes for you guys, quick summary, and then ways to reach us, especially if you want to work with Oscar, kind of as a coach and kind of start to evolve your life and re-step back into that authenticity and to the person that you are and kind of work through those beliefs because both of us hit on subconscious beliefs in different ways in becoming who you really want to authentically become. So reach out to us, stay connected with us, let us know what you really want us to talk about next time. All right.
exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure.
Same,
So,
Emily. We'll talk soon.
absolutely, Oscar.